My name is Eliza Morgan. I used to believe in certainty, in the promise of tomorrows that would always come, until the day everything shattered. The first time I saw him, it was raining, not the gentle kind that makes you think of spring flowers and new beginnings, the angry kind, the kind that makes the world blur at the edges and forces everyone to run for cover. Everyone except him. He stood in the middle of the quad, face tilted toward the sky, letting the rain wash over him like he was trying to cleanse something from his soul, like he was daring the storm to take him. I watched from beneath the awning of the campus coffee shop, clutching my economics textbook to my chest like a shield. My hair was plastered to my face, makeup running down my cheeks, clothes soaked through from the 30-second dash from my car. And yet, I couldn't take my eyes off him. There was something beautiful about his defiance, something that made my chest ache when he finally turned and saw me staring. I didn't look away. I should have. That's what normal people do when caught watching strangers. But there was nothing normal about that moment. Nothing normal about the way his eyes locked with mine across the rain-soaked space between us. Blue. His eyes were so blue they seemed to glow in the storm's gray light. He walked toward me then, unhurried, as if the downpour was nothing more than a slight inconvenience. Water dripped from his dark hair, ran in rivulets down his face, soaked his white t-shirt until it clung to his frame like a second skin. "You're staring," he said when he reached me. His voice was deeper than I expected, rougher. "You're standing in a thunderstorm," I replied, kind of hard not to stare. His lips curved into something almost like a smile, but his eyes remained serious, haunted. "I'm Noah," he said, extending his hand. "Eliza," I responded, placing my palm against his. His skin was cold from the rain, but his grip was warm and firm. It sent a shiver up my arm that had nothing to do with temperature. I didn't know it then, but that handshake was the beginning of the end. The moment my carefully ordered world started to unravel. Because some people come into your life like a storm. They shake everything up, leave nothing untouched. And when they're gone, nothing looks the same. Noah Coleman was my storm. "You can't seriously be considering this," Chelsea said, her voice rising over the din of the cafeteria. She stabbed at her salad with more force than necessary, sending a cherry tomato rolling across the table. It had been 2 weeks since the rain. 2 weeks of running into Noah in the strangest places, the library at midnight, the 24-hour diner off campus, the rooftop garden no one ever visited. 2 weeks of conversations that stretched until dawn. 2 weeks of learning he was a physics major with a minor in philosophy, that he could quote Nietzsche and Neil deGrasse Tyson in the same breath, that he had a scar on his left palm from a childhood accident he wouldn't talk about. 2 weeks of feeling more alive than I had in years. "It's just a road trip," I said, avoiding Chelsea's gaze. 4 days, spring break. We'll be back before classes start. "With a guy you barely know," Chelsea countered, her eyes, dark and serious, fixed on mine across the table. "A guy you, by your own admission, is complicated and intense." I flinched at hearing my own words repeated back to me. I had used those exact terms to Tori Noah to her just days ago. "I know what I'm doing," I said, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. I had no idea what I was doing. Not really. All I knew was that when Noah had asked me to drive to the coast with him, to see the ocean and the stars away from the city lights, I'd said yes before I could think better of it. Chelsea sighed, her expression softening. Liz, I've known you since freshman orientation. You color code your class notes. You make spreadsheets for your grocery shopping. You've never done anything spontaneous in the 3 years I've known you. She reached across the table, covering my hand with hers. And suddenly you're skipping town with some broody stranger who stands in rainstorms. It doesn't add up. She was right. It didn't add up. Nothing about Noah and me made sense on paper. He was chaos. I was order. He questioned everything. I accepted most things as they were. He lived each moment like it might be his last. I planned for a future 5, 10, 20 years down the line. Maybe that's why I need to do this, I said quietly. Maybe I'm tired of being predictable. Chelsea studied me for a long moment. Just promise me you'll be careful, she finally said, and text me every day. If I don't hear from you, I'm calling the police and your parents, in that order. I laughed, the tension breaking. I promise. But some promises, I would learn, are impossible to keep. The coastal highway stretched before us like a ribbon, winding along cliffs that dropped sharply to the ocean below. Noah drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the center console, fingers occasionally brushing against mine. Each touch was electric, sending sparks dancing across my skin. We'd left campus at dawn, the car packed with sleeping bags, a tent, and enough food for our 4-day escape. The further we got from the university, the more I felt something uncoiling inside me, something that had been wound tight for as long as I could remember. Tell me something you've never told anyone, Noah said, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between us. The late afternoon sun caught in his hair, turning the dark strands amber at the edges. I considered his question, trailing my fingers along the open window, letting the wind catch them. With anyone else, I would have deflected, given some harmless secret that wasn't really a secret at all. But with Noah, I found myself wanting to be honest in a way that terrified me. I'm afraid of disappointing people, I finally said. My parents, my professors, myself. I've built my entire life around meeting expectations. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, panicking that one day I'll realize none of it was what I actually wanted. I didn't look at him as I spoke, kept my eyes fixed on the horizon where the ocean met the sky in a seamless blue line. I'd never admitted that fear aloud before, had barely acknowledged it to myself. Noah was quiet for so long I thought he might not respond. When he finally did, his voice was soft. I think that's the bravest thing I've ever heard anyone say. I turned to him then, surprised. Brave? It feels more like cowardice, living a life I'm not sure I chose. He shook his head. No, brave because you see it. Most people never even realize they're living someone else's version of their life. His eyes met mine briefly before returning to the road. You can't change what you don't acknowledge. Your turn, I said, needing to shift the focus away from me. Tell me something you've never told anyone. His hands tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles whitening. For a moment, I thought he might not answer. Then, so quietly I almost didn't hear him over the rush of the wind, he said, I don't think I have much time left. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and opaque. I stared at his profile, at the tense line of his jaw, the slight furrow between his brows. What do you mean? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled the car over at a scenic viewpoint, throwing it into park with more force than necessary. The engine ticked as it cooled, the only sound besides the distant crash of waves against the cliffs below and the beating of my own heart. "Noah," I said, a strange fear gripping me. "What do you mean?" He turned to face me then, and the raw pain in his eyes made my breath catch. "I have an aneurysm," he said. "Brain, inoperable. It could rupture tomorrow or 10 years from now. There's no way to know." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I gripped the dashboard to steady myself. "That's why you were standing in the rain that day," I whispered, the realization dawning. "That's why you live like I'm running out of time," he finished. "Yeah, I found out 3 months ago, right after winter break. Had a seizure during a physics lab. Woke up in the hospital to a doctor telling me I'm essentially a ticking time bomb." Tears burned behind my eyes. "Does anyone else know?" He shook his head. "Just my mom. And now you." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Miss, congratulations. You're now part of a very exclusive club." I reached for him without thinking, my hands framing his face. His stubble was rough against my palms. "Why tell me? Why bring me on this trip?" His eyes, those impossible blue eyes, searched mine. "Because from the moment I saw you watching me in the rain, I knew you were different. Because when I'm with you, I don't feel like I'm dying. I feel like I'm finally starting to live." Then he kissed me, and it felt like falling, like standing in a storm, like finding something I hadn't known I was looking for. Against his lips, I made a silent promise. I would make whatever time he had left count. I would help him live. I didn't know then how much that promise would cost me, how it would break me apart and remake me, how loving someone with an expiration date changes you. I just knew I couldn't walk away, not from Noah, not from us, even if tomorrow never came. We reached the beach house just as the sun was setting. It belonged to Noah's uncle, who used it mainly in the summer and had given Noah the keys and his blessing for our spring break getaway. It was smaller than I'd imagined, a weathered blue cottage perched on a bluff, overlooking the ocean. Salt-worn shutters framed windows that reflected the dimming sky. A wooden deck wrapped around 3 sides, offering panoramic views of the water. "It's beautiful," I said, stepping out of the car and stretching my legs after the long drive. The air smelled of salt and pine, crisp and clean, in a way that made my lungs feel suddenly larger. Noah came around to my side, our bags slung over his shoulder. "Wait until you see it in the morning," he said. "The sunrise over the water is..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "There aren't really words." Inside, the cottage was all warm wood and faded blue fabric. Shelves lined with paperback novels and seashells. A stone fireplace dominated one wall of the small living room. Through a doorway, I could see a kitchen with windows that faced the ocean. "I'll start a fire," Noah said, setting our bags down. "There's only one bedroom. I can take the couch, if in..." "No," I interrupted, surprising myself with my boldness. "I want to stay with you." His eyes darkened, and he took a step toward me. "Eliza," he said, my name a question and a warning, all at once. "I know what I'm doing," I told him, and this time it wasn't a lie. I'd made my decision the moment he told me about his condition. I wouldn't waste a single moment we had together, not out of pity, but because for the first time in my life, I was choosing something solely for myself. Later, after a dinner of sandwiches eaten on the deck under a sky full of stars, after a bottle of wine that made my head swim pleasantly, we lay in the bedroom with the windows open to the sound of the waves. Noah's hands traced patterns on my skin that felt like promises. His lips mapped constellations across my body until I was breathless, trembling when we finally came together. It was with a desperation that spoke of our shared knowledge. That time was precious, that this moment was guaranteed, but the next might not be. And afterward, as we lay tangled in sheets damp with sweat and the salt air, Noah pressed his forehead to mine. "I shouldn't have brought you into this," he whispered. "It's not fair to you." I curled my fingers into his hair, angering him to me. "Life isn't fair," I said. "If it was, you wouldn't be sick. But we're here now, together, and I choose this. I choose you." He kissed me then, so gently it made my heart ache. "I don't deserve you," he murmured against my lip. "You don't get to decide that," I told him. I to lay. We fell asleep with our limbs intertwined. His heart beat steady against my palm. I tried not to think about how that same heart might cease to beat without warning, how the brain that housed his brilliant mind, his dry humor, his capacity for joy and wonder and love, harbored a betrayal in its delicate tissue. I failed. I thought of little else. The next morning, I woke alone. Panic seized me instantly, a cold vise around my chest. I sat up, heart pounding, scanning the room for any sign of Noah. The bedroom door stood open. Beyond it, I could hear movement in the kitchen, the clink of mugs, the hiss of a kettle. Relief flooded me, so intense it left me lightheaded. This, I realized, would be my life with Noah. Constant fear, moments of terror at every unexplained absence, a dread that would never fully subside. I slipped from the bed, pulling on Noah's discarded t-shirt. It smelled like him, pine and salt and something uniquely Noah. I padded barefoot to the kitchen, where I found him at the stove, his back to me as he flipped pancakes in a cast iron skillet. "You're staring again," he said without turning around. I could hear the smile in his voice. "Hard not to," I replied, echoing our first conversation. I crossed to him, wrapping my arms around his waist, pressing my cheek between his shoulder blades. His heart beat steady and strong beneath my touch. For now, we ate breakfast on the deck, watching the waves crash against the rocks below. The day stretched before us, full of possibility. "What do you want to do today?" Noah asked, reaching across the table to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear. The simple gesture sent warmth coursing through me. "Everything," I said. "I want to do everything." And for 3 days, we hiked along coastal trails, collecting shells and sea glass. We swam in the frigid ocean, screaming and laughing at the cold. We built a bonfire on the beach and danced around it like children. We made love in every room of the cottage, against every surface, as if trying to leave pieces of ourselves behind. Noah taught me constellations, his fingers tracing patterns in the night sky as we lay on a blanket on the sand. I taught him how to make my grandmother's spaghetti sauce, the recipe I'd memorized at 12 and had never shared with anyone. I talked about everything and nothing. His childhood in Arizona, my parents' expectations for me to follow my father into law, books we loved, movies we hated, the physics of black holes and the poetry of Pablo Neruda. We didn't talk about the aneurysm, not directly, but its presence shadowed every moment, giving each second a weight and intensity that was both beautiful and unbearable. On our last, as we packed the car for our return to campus the next morning, Noah grew quiet, withdrawn in a way he hadn't been since our first day at the cottage. "What's wrong?" I asked, folding the last of our clothes into a duffel bag. Are you feeling okay? Wetendo sat on the edge of the bed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd come to recognize as a sign of agitation. I need to ask you something, he said, and I need you to be honest. I sat beside him, dread pooling in my stomach. Okay. He took my hand, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. When we get back to school, he hesitated, swallowing hard. Do you want to continue this, us? I stared at him, not understanding. Of course I do. Why would you even ask that? Why would you even ask that? Why, 'cause I'm not stupid. Eliza, I know what I'm asking of you. To be with someone who could collapse at any moment. To invest in a relationship with no future. His voice cracked on the last word. It's not fair to you. Stop saying that. I said, anger flaring suddenly. Stop trying to decide what's fair for me. I'm not a child. I know exactly what I'm choosing. Do you? He challenged, his eyes fierce in the dim light. Do you really understand what it means to watch someone you care about die? Because I do. I watched my father waste away from cancer for 2 years when I was 14. I saw what it did to my mother, what it's still doing to her. I won't put you through that. 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 Your father was sick for years. You said yourself the aneurysm could never rupture. Or it could be years from now. Or it could be tomorrow, he said quietly. Or it could be tomorrow, he said quietly. When tomorrow breaks, I might not be here. I cupped his face in my hands, forcing him to look at me. Then we don't waste today. We don't waste a single moment we have. I won't put you that nosed. I won't waste a single moment we have. I've eyes searching mine. Then he nodded slowly. Okay, he whispered. Okay. We made love that night, with a tenderness that brought tears to my eyes, as if we were both trying to memorize every inch of each other. Every sound, every taste, every sensation. Afterward, as Noah slept beside me, his chest rising and falling in the rhythm that had become as familiar to me as my own heartbeat, I watched the moonlight play across his features. I made another silent promise then, that no matter what happened, I wouldn't regret this. I wouldn't regret him, even if our time together was measured in days rather than years. I fell asleep with that thought, my head on his chest, his arms wrapped securely around me. When I woke the next morning, the bed was empty again. This time, he wasn't in the kitchen. I checked every room in the cottage, calling his name with increasing urgency. The bathroom was empty, the living room, the deck. His car was still in the driveway. His phone was on the nightstand. His shoes were by the door. Panic clawed at my throat as I ran barefoot down the path that led from the cottage to the beach below. The sun was just rising, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The tide was going out, leaving behind shells and seaweed in dark, wet patterns on the sand. And there, at the water's edge, was Noah. Relief hit me so hard I stumbled, nearly falling to my knees. He stood with his back to me, jeans rolled up to his calves, feet in the surf. The morning light turned his hair to fire. I walked toward him slowly, the wet sand cool beneath my feet. He must have heard me coming, but he didn't turn. You scared me, I said when I reached him. I thought, I know what you thought, he said, his voice gentle. He turned to me then, and the expression on his face made my breath catch. Serene, determined, loving. I came down to see the sunrise, he said, the one I told you about. I wanted to see it one more time before we left. He reached for me, pulling me to his side. Together, we watched the sun continue its ascent, turning the water to liquid gold. "It's beautiful," I whispered. "Yes," he agreed, but when I glanced up, he wasn't looking at the horizon. He was looking at me. We packed the car in companionable silence, made one last cup of coffee in the kitchen, where we'd shared breakfasts and midnight snacks, locked the cottage behind us. As Noah pulled onto the coastal highway, I turned in my seat to watch the blue cottage recede in the distance. A lump formed in my throat, an inexplicable sense of loss washing over me. "We'll come back," Noah said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "I promise." I laced my fingers through his, wanting desperately to believe him. We were halfway back to campus when it happened. One moment, Noah was laughing at something I'd said, his head thrown back, the sound filling the car. The next, his face went slack, his hand fell from mine. The car began to drift across the center line. "Noah," I said, alarm spiking through me. "Noah." His eyes rolled back. A sound escaped him. Not quite a word. Not quite a moan. The car continued its trajectory into oncoming traffic. I lunged for the wheel, jerking it hard to the right. The car swerved violently, tires screaming on the asphalt. We careened off the road, skidding through dirt and gravel before coming to a jarring stop against a tree. Pain bloomed across my forehead. Warm liquid trickled into my eyes. Blood, I realized distantly. My blood. "Noah," I gasped, turning to him. He was slumped against the driver's side door, his body convulsing. His eyes were open but unseeing. Blood trickled from his nose, from the corner of his mouth. With shaking hands, I reached for my phone, dialing 911. The operator's voice sounded far away, underwater. I gave our location as best I could, describing the mile marker we'd passed moments before, the landmarks nearby. "He has an aneurysm," I heard myself saying, the words tumbling out between sobs. "A brain aneurysm. Please hurry. Please." I unbuckled Noah's seatbelt, cradled his head in my lap. His seizure had subsided, but his breathing was shallow, labored. A terrible gurgling sound accompanied each exhale. "Stay with me," I begged, stroking his face, his hair. "Please stay with me. Help is coming. Just hold on. Please hold on. Please hold on. Please hold on." I don't know how long we waited. Time stretched and contracted, each second an eternity, each minute gone. In a blink, I talked to him continuously, reminiscing about our days at the beach house, making plans for when he was better. Pleas we both knew were lies even as I spoke them into existence. At some point, his eyes cleared, focused on my face. "Eliza," he whispered, my name a rasp between bloodied lips. "I'm here," I said, leaning close. "I'm right here. Don't try to talk. Save your strength." He shook his head slightly, wincing at the movement. "Need to say," he coughed. A wet, terrible sound. "Thank you for seeing me for these days." "Stop it," I said fiercely. "You're going to be fine. You're going to have more days. Years of days. This isn't the end. It can't be." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "It was always going to end like this," he murmured. "I just didn't think it would be so soon." His hand found mine, squeezing weakly. "Be brave. Eliza Morgan, live your life, not someone else's. Promise me." "I promise. I promise. I promise. I promise. I promise. I promise." tears streaming down my face, mingling with the blood. But you have to promise to fight, to stay with me. Always, he whispered, but his eyes were drifting shut, his grip on my hand loosening. In the distance, I heard sirens. They took him from me in a flurry of activity. Paramedics with grim faces, urgent voices, speaking in medical terminology I couldn't fully comprehend. The whir of helicopter blades as they airlifted him to the nearest trauma center. They wouldn't let me go with him. I wasn't family, just a girl he'd known for 3 weeks, just the girl who loved him. A police officer drove me to the hospital. 90 minutes away, I sat in the back of his cruiser, hands clasped in my lap, still sticky with Noah's blood. I stared at them, these hands that had touched him, healed him, tried to keep him with me. I couldn't bring myself to wipe the blood away. Healed. At the hospital, they made me wait hours in a vinyl chair beneath fluorescent lights. I called Chelsea, Stana, to conversation a blur. I must have sounded hysterical, because she said she was driving down immediately. Stana, that she'd be there by nightfall. I tried to call Noah's mother, Stana, but I realized I didn't have her number, didn't even know her name. I gave what information I could to the hospital staff. They promised they were working on contacting his next of kin, Stana. The doctor who finally came to speak with me had kind eyes and a tired voice. She sat beside me, her clipboard balanced on her knees. Stana, the aneurysm ruptured, she said gently. The bleeding was extensive. He did everything we could. Stana, I stared at her. Stana, uncomprehending. The words reached my ears but refused to penetrate my brain. No, I said. Stana, no. Stana, 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 Stana. He was just talking to me. In the car, he was laughing. The doctor placed a hand on my shoulder. I'm so sorry, she said. He never regained consciousness after arrival. He passed 20 minutes ago. Stana. The world tilted again, fractured, shattered into pieces that would never fit back together. Noah was gone. The days that followed moved like a nightmare in slow motion. Chelsea arrived as promised, Stana wrapping me in a fierce hug that smelled of her familiar perfume. She took charge when I couldn't, speaking with hospital staff, arranging for my car to be towed, driving me back to campus. Stana, Noah's mother, Marianne, called me 2 days later. The hospital had found my number in Noah's phone. She thanked me for being with him in his final moments. Noah had told her about me during their weekly calls, that he'd never sounded so happy as he had these past few weeks. She asked if I would come to the funeral in Arizona. I said yes without hesitation. Chelsea drove me to the airport, waited with me until it was time to board. Are you sure you're okay to do this? She asked, concern etched in every line of her face. You barely knew him, Stana. I didn't try to explain. How could I make her understand that in 3 weeks, Noah had known me more deeply than people I'd called friends for years? That in 4 days at a beach house, we'd lived more fully than some people do in decades? Stana, I need to go, was all I said. She nodded. Stu nodded, hugging me tightly before I walked through security. Stana. The funeral was small. Noah hadn't had many close friends. His mother greeted me with a hug that felt like coming home. She had his eyes, the same impossible blue. It made my heart twist painfully in my chest. Stana. He wanted to be cremated. She told me. Stana. He wanted his ashes scattered in the ocean. I think he was already planning that before he met you, Stana. But knowing he got to see it one more time, with you, that gives me comfort. I learned more about Noah in those 2 days in Arizona than I had in our brief time together. How he'd been a quiet child who came alive when talking about the stars. How he'd cared for his father during his illness. Reading to him when the pain was too much. Explaining complex physics theories to distract him during treatment. How after his father died, he'd thrown himself into his studies, graduating high school 2 years early. I learned that he'd known about the aneurysm for longer than he'd told me. 6 months, not 3. That doctors had given him a year at most. That he'd nearly dropped out of college when he got the diagnosis. But his mother had convinced him to finish what he'd started. He was so different these past few weeks, Marianne said as we sat on her patio the night before I was to fly home. When he told me about you, it was the first time since the diagnosis that he sounded like he was making plans again, looking forward to something. She pressed something into my palm, a small velvet pouch. He would want you to have this, she said. Inside was a pendant on a silver chain, a tiny glass vial containing what looked like dust, but, upon closer inspection, were minuscule flecks of light. It's stardust, Marianne explained, from a meteorite. His father gave it to him on his 10th birthday. He never took it off until... She trailed off, her voice breaking. I can't take this, I said, trying to hand it back. It should stay with you. She closed my fingers around it. Noah believed we're all made of stardust, she said, that the elements in our bodies were forged in the hearts of stars billions of years ago, that when we die, we return to the cosmos. She smiled through her tears. It gave him comfort. Maybe it will comfort you too. I flew home the next day, the pendant around my neck, a small urn of ashes in my carry-on. Marianne had given me half, asking me to scatter them at the beach house when I was ready. He loved it there, she'd said, with you. Returning to campus was surreal. Life had continued in my absence. Classes, assignments, the everyday rhythm of college that now seemed trivial, pointless. I moved through my days like a ghost, attending lectures, taking notes, speaking when spoken to, but inside, I was hollow. Chelsea tried to understand. My other friends gave me space, unsure how to console someone grieving a person they'd never met, a relationship that had barely begun. It's not normal, I overheard a girl from my study group say. She knew him for what? A month, and she's acting like she lost her husband of 20 years. I wanted to explain that time isn't what measures the depth of connection, that some people change you irrevocably in an instant, that Noah had awakened something in me that couldn't be put back to sleep. Instead, I held my tongue, kept my grief private, wore it like the pendant around my neck, close to my heart, invisible to everyone else. 3 months after the funeral, I returned to the beach house. Noah's uncle had given me the keys when I'd written to explain what happened, to thank him for the loan of the cottage. Noah loved that place. He'd written back, it would please him to know you found comfort there. Use it whenever you need to. I went alone, driving the same coastal highway, passing the spot where our car had crashed. Someone had placed a small wooden cross by the roadside. Marianne, perhaps, or his uncle. I didn't stop. The cottage was exactly as we'd left it. Dishes we'd washed, still in the drainer. Books we'd read stacked on the coffee table. The bed made hastily on our last morning. Corners untucked. Pillows askew. I walked through each room, touching surfaces we'd touched together, remembering. As the sun began to set, I took the urn to the beach, to the spot where Noah had stood that last morning, watching the sunrise. The tide was coming in, waves lapping at my feet as I waded into the water. You were right, I said aloud. Unscrewing the lid of the urn, the sunrise over the water is beyond words. I wish we'd had more of them. I tilted the urn, watching as the ashes scattered on the wind, danced across the surface of the waves, disappeared into the vast blue, returning to the cosmos. As Marianne had said, I'm trying to be brave, I told the empty air, to live my life, not someone else's. It's harder than I thought it would. As I spoke, the sky blazed orange and pink, the sun sinking below the horizon in a final burst of glory, the exact mirror of the sunrise Noah had loved. I stayed until the stars appeared, countless pinpricks of light in the darkening sky. I found the constellations Noah had taught me, traced their patterns with my finger as he had done, and somewhere in that vastness, in the space between the stars, I felt something loosen in my chest, not healing, not yet, but the beginning of acceptance, the first tentative step toward a life after Noah. I returned to the cottage, made a cup of tea, and sat on the deck under the star-filled sky. The pendant rested against my skin, warm from my body heat, stardust, the same stuff that made up the stars above, the same stuff that had made up Noah, the same stuff that made up me. In the morning, I would pack up and drive back to campus. I would meet with my academic advisor and change my major from pre-law to astronomy. I would call Marianne and thank her again for the pendant, tell her about scattering the ashes, ask her to share more stories about Noah when she felt ready. But for now, sat in the quiet, surrounded by the ghosts of 4 perfect days, and watched the stars. Noah had been right about one thing. Tomorrow was never guaranteed. When tomorrow breaks, any of us could be gone, but he'd been wrong about something too. Our relationship hadn't been one with no future. Said our relationship hadn't been one with no future. The future was right here, in the choices I made because of him, in the way I now saw the world, in the courage I was finding to live authentically. Satyr in the pendant, satyr in its weight against my palm. Thank you, I whispered to the night, to the stars, to Noah, and somewhere in the vast universe, satyr in the Bentic heard me, down an embankment. And that's how Eliza and Noah's story ends. A reminder that love sometimes arrives in the briefest moments, yet leaves an eternal mark, just as Noah taught Eliza to live courageously. I hope this story has touched your heart too, reminding us all to cherish every moment, because we never know when tomorrow breaks. If you felt the same emotional connection that I felt while sharing this story, please help me bring these stories to more people. Every like and share from you is like a tiny star in the universe of my content. And if you want to hear more heart-stirring stories like this one, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because just as Noah and Eliza found meaning in their brief time together, I too want to create meaningful moments with you through these stories. Until our next story, and remember, we're all made of the same stardust.